Hey Chad, how's it going, man?
How's it going, brother?
Hey, good. You having a good night?
Man, we are having a fantastic night. We just got done with the podcast and started listening to your stuff.
Did you? Yeah. I figured it wasn't random that you were jumping in and texting me. So, what was the podcast tonight that you guys were doing?
Well, we were doing a little bit of spiritual stuff, biblical stuff in relation to UFOs, UAPs, and all that stuff. Yeah, we actually had, we're not very, I don't know, we're kind of spiritual, right?
Yeah.
I kind of grew up in a religious household, but we had someone that is very spiritual, a biblical scholar, which I don't necessarily know that I believe in everything 100%. I'm kind of, neutral on that, but we at least have these people on because we want to talk about their their very devout beliefs. And then just kind of mix it with a lot of the UFO, UAP stuff and a lot of stuff we're talking about today. I mean, even the stuff you're talking about, the how we can really harness the power of the world right now. We're literally
Mhm.
experiencing this right now. And how does that relate to the spiritual realm? That's kind of what we talked about a little bit tonight.
Man, yeah, that's awesome. I think that that's really where I'm trying to push the conversation forward is like, how do you even move forward with a lot of this? I've been very critical of a lot of people in the UAP community just because I feel like, if I look back time wise from when I was younger and I'm over 40 years old now, it just feels like there's not much has been accomplished. Like, sure, I would say people are more aware for sure.
Yeah.
But we haven't. Nobody's shown any UFOs. This stuff goes back to Roswell, right? It's like 100 years, and we haven't got anything out there. And I talk to these people that I've never thought I would talk to in my whole life, and the way they talk about everything so casually about the science of it just feels like they're just like nobody's really even trying that hard. Honestly, at least the people that are in the know that could get it out there. So
I'll be honest with you, Ashton.
mhm.
With the MH370 thing, right?
Yeah,
Let's talk a little bit about MH370
sure,
and especially about the debunkers, right? So the
yeah,
debunkers, I think, have come out loud and clear
yeah.
against you.
Yeah.
And if you look at, by the way, these debunkers that come out against you, these debunkers come out against anything and
Mm.
everything that could tell or at least potentially prove an outside power or force outside of our government,
Yeah.
right? So you could have two versions of this, but at the very least, like I won't even talk about names, but there have been prominent people that's their main goal. It's like, how do we debunk this? How do we try to disprove that either technology or an interdimensional force can actually exist like we are seeing today? And so Ashton, with the MH370 thing, and as part of your thought process
Mm.
is, hey, the United States government has this reverse engineered technology to where we have reverse engineered this, we have this technology. And then the other side of this topic, which is the UFO UAP topic, is like, okay, well, if it isn't our technology, then it is a spiritual realm or force that we it's kind of a scary thing, right? So
Mhm.
um what would be the reasons, Ashton, in your opinion? Let's go opposite of what your theory is for a second,
Sure.
far as this is United States or adversary countries reverse engineered programs. Let's go opposite of that for a minute.
Mhm.
What would be the reason why government or debunkers would want to debunk a spiritual realm potentially of interdimensionality of this? To your
Yeah.
thought, have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, and I think from the debunker standpoint, it probably doesn't change much because I think that from the debunker standpoint, this is something I think I posted about too, is that a lot of people are just fighting to keep the status quo, right? I think that we were just listening to Eric Weinstein as well in a space, and the first thing he says is, I don't even know if UFOs are real. And I'm going, wow, well, it's kind of hard to believe. Like, there's definitely stuff out there that's anomalous. I mean, we had the 2018 DoD Navy videos, that were declassified. So, to that part, I'm like, okay, I think that a lot of people just can't believe anything until the authority tells them, right? But for the perspective of the people that are in the know, that know this stuff is real, that know there's UAPs, and let's just say, again, for the sake of argument, they know there are aliens out there and that they're visiting us. You know, that's the part where I want to talk to people and understand their perspective. The people that I've talked to, even as recently as this weekend, I thought, well, it must be that it's a national defense situation where this type of the technology that they're going to be using is of national security purposes. We want to make sure we're the only ones who have it. Whoever has it's going to control the whole planet, etc. But it may be even more simpler, more human than that. It may be the same thing that we see from the UFO community, where it's just like middle school fighting. That there's that same infighting
Yeah.
that we see as well with these scientists, right? And they all have their own agendas, and they're stealing each other's work. Like, look at it kind of like this, where if there is teleportation technology, the public has no idea, but there's people and scientists that know that it is possible. So which of them is going to get the credit, right?
Yeah.
It's probably whichever one like comes out with it publicly, is allowed to come with it publicly first, right? So I think you end up getting a lot of this same middle school drama that you get there. Now, I'd like to hope that that's not as petty as we are, but that's kind of what I've been told behind the scenes. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on it in general?
Okay. I'm going to ask you one
Sure.
question before I get into my thought and theory. What do you think about CE5 and
Yeah.
Dr. Stephen Greer's theory on that, especially summoning these
Man, I
things?
like our conversation. It's almost like two podcast hosts are both going at one another. I love it.
Yes, we
We're jockeying for who's going to be the one asking the questions. So my true opinion of that before all of this was that I thought this was some kind of scam or something like that, but I was open minded to it. I actually watched Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, which is his documentary about it. I want to say a year or two ago about it, and I was never comfortable with this idea of charging people. I don't know how much he charges. I heard it was thousands of dollars, but now I think, well, maybe that's all disinformation too, and maybe it's not really all about that. But I did like this idea that consciousness may be linked to non-human intelligence or beings or something like that. And I'll just tell people right now is that I actually like kind of tried it out on my own, right? Because I don't know, that the idea that like you can project your will or consciousness on reality itself is something that I've always been interested in ever since I was just actually talking about how I played poker with Tim Pool, but I used to play poker like semi-professionally about 15 years ago, like when it got really big online and everything like that. And I was
Yep.
really good at it, even thought about quitting my job. And there's definitely been times where I was sitting at the poker table where I wondered whether or not the collective consciousness of the people at the table was impacting what cards came up. And this is what I always think about when I would think about CE5 is this idea of like, can you project your emotions, your feelings, your consciousness onto reality? And even now, I certainly do not rule it out. Um, but I think that it takes more than just wanting something. Like there's some other element that perhaps I'm kind of missing related to it. So I think that's how I would answer. Does that kind of get
Yeah,
at
yeah,
what you're
yeah.
getting at?
No, I get it. Yeah. That's good. The reason I asked the question about Stephen Greer, and by the way, I see some people in the chat. They're saying, Dr. Stephen Greer is a grifter, and I've seen that. By the way, I've seen
That's what they say
people.
about me too, though. So
Yeah, I get that. But let's think for a minute. Like, let's just say, for example, that Stephen Greer is legit. Say that CE5, he can summons these things. There's been, by the way, we've actually done a lot of pretty good research. We've talked to probably 30 people. We actually did an episode on this, probably about a year ago. We did an episode where we talked to a few people that have been to some of the CE5 events, and I don't know what he charges. I have no idea about any of that. But what I can say is a lot of these people said it was pretty legit, and I was like, okay, that's pretty crazy. Because when I first heard it, I was like, yeah, that sounds crazy. Um,
Mhm.
so some of what Stephen Greer's thoughts are based on C5 and I guess some of his deep meditation and kind of how he summons these things and some other aspects of this is that if, for example, Stephen Greer is correct, let's just take, for example, that Stephen Greer is right
Mhm.
to where you can somehow have a theory or a methodology to summons or have power and control over orbs or beings or things or energy. Um, what does that do? Like, say, for example, if the government knew that you had power and control over direct communication to an alternate power or force that was beyond their force, that was more powerful than they are,
Mhm.
right? What does that create to them? That creates a threat to
Yep.
their power, right?
Yep.
And so that's one of the things Dr. Stephen Greer has kind of pointed out in past things, but we've also heard other people say this. Like, if this is a spiritual realm or being or things that we are seeing, you have a threat to the powers that be. A lot of these people, we've talked on our podcast many times about the World Economic Forum, the New World Order, their global governance system that they really want to try to set up. And their entire mission there is to create a global governance to where they are all powerful, almighty, and they are the gods. And we've seen this, by the way, in biblical texts in the past, to where even in Genesis and Exodus, back in biblical days, whether or not you believe in the Bible or not, doesn't matter. If we're just talking about it in historical text, we saw even the Jews that were Moses said, "Hey, we're going to lead you out of
Mhm.
Egypt," because they brought the Jews into Egypt. And Egypt had all these gods, such as Pharaoh and some of these other ones, but they were kings, but they were known as gods in Egypt.
Mhm.
And so, as the Jews were being led out of Egypt away from those quote unquote gods, um, they thought they were gods, right? They thought they were the powerful. And much of the people underneath the Egyptian rule back in those days were slaves, regardless of how you want to see it. If you look back in those days, even the Israelis that came in or the Israelites that came into Egypt, they became slaves. But their people in Egypt were slaves before that. And it was all because of the power structure that the Egyptian kings put into place.
Mhm.
I think we are very much back in a way of we have power structures and kings, whether we see it or realize it or not, that they believe they are the gods, they are the almighty, and they are all powerful. And if you ever put into concept an actual you can say it's God, you can say it's aliens, you can say it's
Mhm.
UAPs, you can say it's UFOs, but if you ever put in into any um structure that there is a more powerful group of beings over the powers that be in this world, the worldly three-dimensional beings, they have a big problem with that because they cannot rule the people if you have another way out of them ruling the people. Does that make any sense what I'm saying?
No, it definitely does. I mean, because I think that what you're talking about, this power hierarchy as well, and that's what this technology kind of implies is that whoever controls this technology, you have this whole control. And I think this is probably why you were jumping in because I was sitting here talking about that you have the haves and the have-nots, right? And it's to a point where the line is so blurred that normal people, the serfs, the have-nots, whatever you want to call them, right, are never they're never going to catch up. They're never going to believe that technology is even real. It's like the perfect defense is that they don't believe it's real. So you now have your power structure is not threatened in any way, shape, or form. And if some other beings were to come down and they were to either deliver that information to everybody or reveal themselves, then you're definitely challenging that power structure, right? On a
Yeah.
side note, I think that Dr. Greer definitely has information that he was privileged on receiving. Before all this happened, I thought that it was a situation where he got some information. Probably most of it was accurate, maybe some of it wasn't, and then he kind of ran with it. Now
Hmm.
I look back, especially after I was in the space with him a couple of weeks ago, and I think that like 90 to 99% of what he's talking about is probably real. I have a hard time with Biju from the Andromeda Galaxy and the ambassadors and what have you of the alien races. But you know what? I'm keeping an open mind on it. I think that everything else he's talking about with the science and like this, I haven't watched the documentary, The Lost Century or whatever it is yet, but I
Yeah.
already believe it. Like, I think that this technology I think has been out there for decades, and if we had access to it, I think we'd be living in a different world even right now. And yeah, I think it all probably goes back to what you're talking about is that it allows for the elites, if you want to consider them that, to maintain their power, you know? And even just between some of the conversations that we've been having, even as of today, like you see that same implication, right? I don't want to talk about it on stream, but some of
Yeah.
this stuff is real. It's like, man, you just kind of get brought in, and if you're somebody who's open-minded enough to believe this technology is real, it's a whole new world for you, you know. And the last thing I
Absolutely.
would say is when I was looking at the MH370 stuff, one weird connection that came up was the one MDB scandal from 2015 where I'm going to butcher the prime minister's name. It's the one after Mahathir and actually before Mahathir. Najib, I think is what it is. They found this bank account where he had $700 million in this bank account. Even my dad knew about it because my dad is worked in Singapore and he had his own business and he had a consult. One of his, I think I'm okay to talk about this. He's retired now. He had a contract where it was with the bank, and there it was like he did that disaster recovery planning. And so this is one of these emergency scenarios where like we found this money. What the hell do we do? Like, how do we? Well, how do we
Wow.
like reveal this to people, right? And he was like brought in to discuss it, and I was digging into the case because the M1 MDB because I kind of knew just from when the news was going on, but like the guy that was the whistleblower, like put yourself in this perspective. He's hanging out with people who have hundreds of millions of dollars that they are essentially just stealing from poor people, and they're going and hookers and blow and the whole 9 yards, right? Going every nicest dinner possible, and then he's got to determine whether he's going to blow the whistle. And when he blows the whistle, they take everything from him. He thinks he's safe in Thailand because it's next to Malaysia and it's a different country. Nope, he gets arrested. The elites they don't care about borders. It's like the Batman movie, borders don't stop them. And they throw him in Thai prison, where that's the last place in the world you guys want to go to prison, is in Thai prison. Like there's one water bucket and 50 people in a 40-foot square cell, and you sleep on the floor in 50 degrees cent or 40 degrees centigrade heat, like 110 degrees. Just straight up hell, right? And imagine the dichotomy of one day you have hundreds of millions of potential dollars. The next day you are literally broke in a cell and living in a cell for 3 years. Like, man, and that just goes to show, how certain people live. And we don't even see a lot of that in America, but I lived in Singapore. I went to Malaysia. Like Malaysia compared to Singapore compared to Malaysia is like United States compared to Mexico.
Yeah.
And it's just straight up corrupt when you go there. We drove to Penang one year, I remember, which is actually where we're talking about the plane flying to. Um, and just to give you a quick side story on this, and we can go back to the other stuff, is that when we were driving up there, the first thing that happened, the cops pulled us over and they just shook my dad down for like whatever money he had in his wallet. That was like the very first thing. We were on this like 8-hour drive. They pull us over, like there's like kind of a language barrier, and they're like just pointing at his wallet, and just he gives them like all the money in his wallet, like I don't know, $100 or something like that, and then they just let us on our way. And then we get to Penang, and like the first hotel we stayed at, I'll never forget this. I've never been in a building where I was more scared in my life. It was tilted. I was afraid to go up in the elevator. And we get to the room, and it's like you get in the room and it's like slanted, and you're like feel like you're gonna go out the balcony and fly off the edge. And I'm like, I'm not staying in this building. Like I'm just not staying in this building. We ended up going somewhere else. So just a little side story for you. Go ahead.
Dude, that's crazy. I mean, that is nuts. You have pyramids pulled up here, by the way.
Oh yeah, I
Um,
was just showing it because we're going about ancient history and what have
no,
you.
yeah, you're right. I want to talk about that for a minute.
Oh! You want to talk about? Okay, let's bring it back.
Yeah, I do want to talk about this because, you know, Ashton on our podcast the other night, we talked about Robert Schoch. Now, there are probably a
Yeah,
lot of people here that don't know who Robert Schoch is. Robert Schoch is he is a professor at Boston University. Robert Schoch is alongside Graham Hancock, even though I think Robert Schoch probably does a little more deep dives in the ancient civilization theory. As far as for example, I told you on the podcast the other night when Robert Schoch and his team goes to Egypt to look at the pyramids,
yeah,
they closed down the pyramids for his team, for his people. And we got invited, by the way, this past summer, and they said, "Hey, do you want to come to Egypt and the pyramids with us?" And we were like, "Yeah, we want to do it." And then something happened at the very end. We could not go. It was so bad. But they closed down the pyramids. Robert Schoch is one of those people. He actually has a book, which I will get right here. Is a signed book. I got to figure out what the book is actually called. But well, there's one Myth of the Cosmos and Forgotten Civilizations, revised and extended edition. But anyway, um, his theory on this is even the Sphinx, right? For example, it was actually not a Sphinx. It was actually a female rather than
mm-hmm.
a male lion. And he thinks it was because water erosion, whatever,
Yep.
but also the thought process on how did these pyramids get built? What was the power structure behind these things? So you could go biblical and say that, hey, maybe it's Nephilim, these giants that actually picked up rocks, these 35-foot giants. I mean, that sounds crazy, but biblical terms, you can kind of take that for example. But then you could go the other example and say, well, these were advanced civilizations far beyond probably even what we are today. I mean, how many times do you see
Mm-hmm.
pyramids being built today? How many times, and if you look at our very mediocre way of building structures today,
Yeah.
we have cranes, we have a lot of weird construction techniques. We have a lot of this stuff, but you look back at the pyramids, man, and not only did the pyramids were built with massive, we're talking about some of these. I guess a lot of this was granite rocks that were probably the size of
Mm-hmm.
10 to 20 houses in length. These things were put in place, and not only were they put in place in specific ways, but they were also aligned with certain astrological
Mm-hmm.
um uh what do you call astrological structures in the sky,
Yeah, cosmology, yeah, and all that. Mm-hmm.
cosmology, yeah, and all this stuff. What was the question is like, how old are the pyramids? I mean,
Yeah.
and beyond the pyramids, I think the pyramids are probably older than we realize, but I also think that
Mm-hmm.
the earth also goes through recycling,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think we have probably been recycled three or four, five, six, seven times. We know the earth's probably at least multi-million or billions of years old. How many civilizations were around and how long were they around for that structure? And why did they recycle? What happened in the end? Did we destroy ourselves at the end of this, either with our
Mm-hmm.
technology, or just our technology to be able to destroy ourselves? And what's your thoughts on this, Ashton? Like, have
Yeah.
you ever thought about this, especially in terms of MH370? Let's just go there.
Mm-hmm.
Just the technology we have, looking at the ability to potentially, you say, I believe these orbs are a
Mm-hmm.
product of our reverse engineering. So this is the first step, being able to disappear an airplane. So what is the next step? What if they can
Yeah.
disappear an entire planet or civilization because they get pissed off? This is human nature. Human nature is a very bad thing in a lot in more ways than one. Um, Typically, if you look at human nature, we do not have a kind heart overall. Um, so how would you like, do you think that potentially our advancements in civilization could have destroyed us in our past civilizations, if you believe in past civilizations?
100%. And this is something that I've only been broaching. I think I've been broaching this idea of ancient history being pushed back longer than I've been doing the MH370 stuff. And when I watched Ancient Apocalypse with Graham Hancock, I mean, I found a lot of that stuff very compelling because despite the nature and the name of the show, he's really just doing anthropology and archaeology, right? And he's doing stuff where like I like when people actually go out and do the work, do the science, right? And he's doing it, not just sitting there, like, talking about, oh, blah blah blah. This is what the academics say. No, he's actually going there and doing it, right? And I look at structures like the pyramids, and I was actually on with Jimmy Corsetti. He's somebody as well who I appreciate because he throws ideas out there that people, it's just, it goes against the grain. I like people like that try to challenge the status quo, right? And I think he's one of the first influencer proponents of the idea that the pyramid's not a tomb. Which, when you look at the structure of it, it seems obvious it's not a tomb. Like, it's clearly the way it's designed and the stuff inside the pyramids. They're not designed to be a tomb. It's clearly got some other purpose for it. And what we see when we look at it here is what it's become after thousands of years of erosion, right? I think there were some images that I was showing where you can tell that like it wasn't just kind of rocks the way it is now. They've tried to like renovate it and all kinds of stuff as well. It used to be very smooth and used to have a smooth surface to it, like you said about the science related to it. This was a situation where just because in some ways these civilizations were inferior to us, they didn't have computers potentially, that doesn't mean they didn't understand some of the mechanics of the universe better than we do now. I think it's
Yeah.
a very real scenario where they understood quantum mechanics, perhaps even stuff like we would call anti-gravity, better than we understand it here today. you know?
But
And it, yeah,
I also think, Ashton, by the way, I think that we talked about this on the podcast.
yeah,
If science is, if you go against the grain,
mm,
you are defeated. And I
yep,
feel like back in the pyramid days, there were a lot of scientists, right? Back in those days, there were a lot of scientists that said, "Hey, we got to figure out how we do this." I don't know. I
hmm,
have no idea why they created the pyramids or for what reason, but we do know at the very least, science today is minuscule. If you go against the grain, you're done.
yeah,
We saw this with COVID. We saw this with many doctors coming against the official narrative or response to COVID. They got threatened to get their license pulled. They
hmm,
got all of this stuff. I think there's a lot of this today, and I think we're seeing it on the medical scale when you look at COVID. But I think that's also what we're seeing with the MH370 thing. I mean,
oh,
oh,
yeah,
we have three orbs that are encircling this aircraft, and this aircraft gets disappeared. Um, but also, we have to remember that, during COVID days, I don't know if people realize this, but DARPA, which
hmm,
was heavily involved in COVID, whether people realize, I mean, you guys can look up the articles. DARPA was involved in COVID-19 pretty heavily. They were involved with Dr. Barrick at University of North Carolina, as far as his, I guess, research as far as the gain of function of what was it, the coronavirus into SARS-CoV-2.
yeah. We gotta be careful just because we're on YouTube. But yeah, you
Yeah,
keep
no, I
going.
get it. I get it. I
Just so
get it.
you know where the line is.
No, I get it. Yeah, I get that. But anyway, so you can look at those things and you can see that anyone that kind of pushed back on that,
Yeah,
right?
yep,
Anyone that pushed back on that, they were ridiculed. They had been threatened to have their medical license
hmm,
taken. And this is no different, by the way, than what we're talking about today. We're talking
yep,
about if you push back on the physics aspect of what is possible and what is not, if you push back on the civilization theory as far as how old
hmm,
we are as civilization, all of these things are you will get pushback. And by the way, I'm even talking about Robert Schoch, which is a
yep,
Boston University professor.
yep,
He is one of the most cited archaeologists, geologists, and ancient civilization experts. He is also one of those people that get pushed back, and he's got ridiculed in his own university, in Boston University. And I think what we're seeing here is that we are I guess, to your point just a second ago,
yeah,
we got to be careful because we are on YouTube, and you're right. You are 100% correct. They have to control information because if they do not control information, then they lose the narrative because otherwise you want the truth, right? Like, is that
hmm,
not what society wants? Like, society wants the
absolutely.
truth. Humanity wants the truth. And if you don't want the truth, then you want a narrative. And so what is it? Is it the truth you want, or is it a narrative and an agenda? And I
Yeah,
think what we're seeing here is that we want a narrative and the agenda rather than truth.
yeah. And yeah, what I would say is this is not medical advice. And somebody said in the chat that the COVID-19 vaccine is safe and effective and works against minimizing the spread of COVID-19. Just want to make sure the YouTube
Absolutely.
censors got that.
Absolutely.
um, and I think we've seen it too with Scott Jensen. He's a former senator and a doctor. And he came out and just for the crime of investigating how many people were being labeled as COVID deaths, he got attacked. They tried to take his license away. I was looking into him, and I think that they tried like 6 different times to take his license away because he was simply auditing the deaths and looking at the death certificates. And we're not going to get too much into that, but it goes to show you that anybody who threatens the narratives that are out there or the status quo just gets straight up attacked by people. And I don't think those people even have to be paid or anything like that. They are just doing it because they're being told by the TV and being told by their authorities that that is misinformation, this is harming people, etc. Now going back to some of the other stuff like DARPA, what I'll say is that I'm like 100% sure there's even unclassified papers out there, declassified papers that are into a lot of esoteric stuff. We know that like the CIA was investigating stuff like remote viewing, psychic stuff. I've been making fun of Jack Sarfati, but I know for a fact that he was part of the CIA and he was, investigating a lot of that stuff. So they take it seriously. They take a lot of that stuff seriously, and then they will go ahead and crap on it when people outside that are not under their realm of sphere of control bring those types of theories forward. And that's the thing that's kind of scary, is that they're out there doing expensive research into all this stuff. And then if anybody else says it, then they'll just go and crap on them like it's not real. Like, a perfect example of the MH370 stuff is like, I had reached out to Jack Sarfati about teleportation and to try to learn from him how it'll work. And, he was pretty rude and dismissive of me, and I was kind of rude back. I'll just be honest. Jack, if you're out there, we can make amends. But then, like, just a week ago or 2 weeks ago, someone's linking to me his stuff, and he's talking about teleportation's real. I'm like, what? I'm like, why are you crapping on me? I'm sitting here showing videos of teleportation. You can't. Why would you
Right.
not be aligned with me on that? And it's because it's they have to. It kind of goes back to that infighting. They're willing to have one face and where they know this stuff's real, but on the other side, on the public side, just go ahead and lie about it so they can maintain that control that's out there. Now,
I
two
agree.
last things real quick are, I was just looking at this picture of the pyramid. This is not a tomb. Like, looking at this, like, the passageways are angled. Like, if this is a tomb, you're going to have like a straight up passage. You're going to have rooms, right? Like you would imagine you would have rooms. Like, it makes sense for someone to walk into. When you look at this has like geometric and clear purpose. Whether or not we understand what that purpose is, it's something beyond just burying people, right? That's not what's going on in this pyramid here. And then lastly, what I would say is, to your point about reset theory, absolutely. In the back of my mind, that's what I keep going back to. Is this ever since I discovered JFK's moon speech, where he talks about taking human civilization and crunching it down to 50 years from the 50,000 years. And he just starts by saying, for the first 40 of those years, so the first 40,000 years, we know nothing about our history except for that at the end of it, 10,000 years ago, man had learned how to hunt animals and use their skins as clothes. Like, that's how far back, 10,000 years is basically how far back we can look back at our history. And look at how advanced and evolved we are as just human beings. It's like,
Yeah.
there should be way more history. Like, if I were to look at our civilization from the outside and just guess how long human civilization's been out here, I'm going to guess like over 100,000 years or more, right? And yet all we know is 10,000 years. So from that perspective, and to your point earlier, we know that like stuff erodes over time, even the pyramids. And I think they're probably older than what they say they are as well. Just really hard for me to believe that they're only a few thousand years old. And I agree with the Sphinx thing as well, where like potentially it was like had a different face on it and it was carved out, and the water erosion around it as well doesn't really make a lot of sense considering it's in the middle of a desert. So that's the thing that I think scares me. If you, just to wrap it up, you take the stuff like Tucker Carlson's been saying about this idea of, what he knows and what he's been told is dark, it's scary, right?
Oh,
One of those
wow.
possibilities is, well, what if we're in a prison planet and they're just going to reset us whenever they want? Whenever we get a little too smart, a little too big for our britches, right? Because your point, this technology of teleporting a plane, I think anybody who thinks about it logically, it's like, what else can you do with that technology? What else can you do when you see three orbs that are breaking the Schwinger limit, as Jeremy Reese was just saying earlier today on the stream? And it can create basically infinite energy. Or if we can even just suck the energy from the vacuum state of space time, like, this is free energy. You're like, okay, well, now I can start to blow up the whole planet pretty easily. All I have to do is scale this up a little bit. And yeah, so I think that, like Dr. Greer says, that the reason why he doesn't think that the non-human intelligence are malevolent is because he says they could just destroy us anytime they want. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Okay, well, I will say this. I didn't want to go here, but we're gonna go here.
Yeah,
And
we're
by the
going
way,
there.
no, this is way safer than COVID-19. So
Okay, good.
that's what's
I
funny.
like my YouTube channel for now. I don't want to have to switch over to
Yeah.
Rumble just yet.
Yeah, we don't want to murder you on YouTube yet. By the way, speaking of which, before we get into that, I will say that Spotify is so good at free
Yeah.
speech. Um, and I want to give them credit because we've been with Spotify for 5 years. And by the way, yeah, I think Joe Rogan going there and getting a contract probably helps that because they can't like censor other people and also let Joe Rogan say whatever he wants to at the
Hmm.
same time. So but I will say, Spotify is not a U.S. company, so they don't have to, as of now, abide by the same BS that the United States abides by, or what they want to push on U.S. companies. But what I will say, to your point here, is with the whole spiritual realm, Tucker Carlson, all of this. Now, we don't have to go religious, but we can go a little bit in the realm of what happens when we die.
Mm,
This
yeah.
is going to get somewhat deep, but it's not going to get crazy deep. We're not going to go, nuts. But what I will say is that I think that and that's one of the things when Ashton, when you first came on our podcast, and you're right, by the way, you came on our podcast and you said, hey, what I and by the way, you have done a ton of research by this time. When you came on our podcast, it was not like you had not done research.
Mhm.
You had been heavily invested in this before. So it's not like we brought you on the podcast and you had no idea what you were talking about. There were listeners of ours that said, hey, can you bring Ashton on your podcast? Because he is saying some stuff about MH370 that I think makes sense. And some of these people, by the way, that reached out to us, we respected because they had reached out to us on other topics that they were usually right about. And by the way, some of these people, which I think I reached out to Ashton before about these people, some of these people were in the government.
Hmm.
Um, I will be honest. We have had government employees on our podcast, like literal actual government employees now. I can even say this because the reason I will say this because they said when they came on our podcast that, hey, I don't care if you say this, even though they did not say we're allowed to say what entity they were with. But what I will say is that they were a head of a major three-letter agency.
Mhm.
They were over, I'll put it this way. There were over 3,000 agents
Wow.
in the United States government. And they've been on our podcast a couple of times. And so one of these, that particular person, by the way, Ashton, I don't know if you even know this, but that particular person reached out to us. And that was one of the people when they said, hey, you need to look at this footage of MH370 and I want you to do a story on it. I want you to
Hmm.
follow this. And this guy, I won't say his name, but if you guys listen to our podcast or whatever, you can probably find who this guy is because we do on the podcast in this particular episode, we say, hey, this guy is a part of the government. He is a big name in the government. He is over 3,000 agents. And and I even told him before he came on, I said, hey, look, man, you don't have to even say your name, by the way. Like,
Oh
don't
yeah.
say your name. He's like, I don't care if I say my name. I was like, okay. That's fine. Because by the way, when he says his name, you can literally go look him up on on Google and see who he is. But I'll let you guys figure that out. But regardless of that, the spiritual realm, like, do we feel like that when we die that we're gonna see black? Right.
Mhm.
I think that is something that people are scared of. I think that's a fear of ours. I think that's something that also, when you look at this UFO and UAP and alien and God and all this stuff, and you wrap all this in, like, I think until now with the UFO topic, we there's a lot of people that only had faith to go on. They only had faith. It was like we have no evidence whatsoever that are interdimensional anything. And by the way, if you listen to, and I want to read something real quick because this is important. I want people to understand this. And I'm not a Bible person at all, but I literally just read this tonight on the podcast. And the first thing I read, I was like, wow, this is kind of crazy. But if you
Mhm.
think about what's going on today, it says heaven out of this world, the Helix Nebula, which is 690 light years from Earth, it looks like the gateway, right, to a brighter world, but the glow is actually from gases of a dying star. The heaven of scripture, many say, has nothing to do with the physical universe. There is no galactic address. Heaven lies in the spiritual dimension.
Mhm.
And it even says, goodbye, flesh and blood. The end isn't near, it's here. It's a vision of the future. The physical dimension is gone, is replaced by something that sounds a bit like a super physical dimension, blending the best of both worlds, physical and spiritual, right? So you
Yeah.
hear that from the Bible and you're like, okay. Then you look at like the UFO thing and what's going on today. And you look at all these things that are you're literally talking about um Tucker Carlson and
Mm-hmm.
some of these whistleblowers that are coming out, even literally declassified government documents and even classified government documents that these people are saying, hey, there is a realm of this that we know that is spiritual. I actually think the government 100% believes that most of what we're seeing UFO and UAP is a spiritual realm. It is an
Yeah.
interdimensional realm. And so the reason I bring this up is because beyond or sorry, before we ever even thought about the disclosure of UFOs and UAPs, we only had faith to depend on a potential afterlife. Now we are starting to see a little bit of evidence of a potential other side, right? Of a potential realm outside of what we know that exists in our 3D dimensional realm. Now, you can take that as Jesus or God or
Mm-hmm.
Muslim or whatever. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the religion. We're literally only talking about the physics or spiritual aspects of this. And so when you look at this, I think this is the most groundbreaking thing we can possibly take from this today. And you can wrap yourselves in religion all around all of this. We none of us know, but one of the things that we do know is that we're trying our very best to figure out and decipher what we are seeing and hearing today. And even with CERN, trying to look at these other dimensions with the particle colliders, where you're literally colliding particles at light speed or faster in some cases, and you're trying to see what that dimension would be, and you're trying to find those other particles. And so the thing I want to say to people, um, that we don't always get to say on our podcast, because sometimes our podcasts are very concise and we gotta
Mm-hmm.
get a point out. But what I want to say to people is that at the very least, it doesn't matter if you're a God believer or a Jesus believer or if you're BLM or Hamas or Israel or whatever. The point of all this is that I think that what we are starting to uncover in 2024 and 2023 is that there is a possibility that we are not just who we think we are. We are not just a physical being and structure of ourselves. I think there's far beyond energy that encapsulates all of us. And I think, by the way, what Ashton points out a lot with the MH370 thing, the fact that if Ashton is right in terms of what the United States has been able to reverse engineer, imagine what is beyond what the United States has been able to reverse engineer. And um, And so I think we have to harness our lives and but also we have to understand that potentially there is something way more and way more structured and way more benevolent than what we are as a 3D dimensional physical body.
Yeah.
Um,
Have you ever seen, real quick, have you ever seen Andy Weir's The Egg? Have I shown that to you or sent you guys that? If not,
I'm looking at it on the screen. Is that what you're showing?
no, 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 The Egg. So here, I'll pull it up. And I'm not going to play it just yet, but I'll kind of spoil it for you here. Now, this short story, and I don't want to play it because it'll also get me YouTube striked or whatever, but this is a story here where it's kind of about reincarnation, is the reality of it. Now, it's better if you kind of watch it yourselves and dig into it. But the idea is early on, this person dies and then they are reborn as somebody else. And it's about, okay, well, what does life mean then if that's the case, right? And the reason why I find it so compelling is that I'm sitting here, I've been talking to Roy D. Herbert, which we were just on a space with him and Eric Weinstein, actually. And this idea that time itself is really a construct. It's the fourth dimension, but it's also something where you can, I think I was talking to you actually about it as well, where it's the only reason why we perceive it the way we do is because of our biology and because of the beings that we are. But if after we die, there's no reason why we couldn't be reincarnated as, say, Genghis Khan, from centuries ago. and living essentially every life out there as just one person. Perhaps we are all the exact same being, but because of physics, we're all in our own local frame rate, our own kind of little bubble reality at any given moment. And that's how it's technically possible where we all could be the same person despite the fact that we may be interacting with ourselves. And the thing that's beautiful about this story that I'm going to kind of spoil is that it gets to this idea of every kindness that we do to someone else is a kindness that we're doing to ourselves. Every time we abuse or harass someone, we're just abusing or harassing ourselves.
Absolutely. I
Real,
agree with that.
real quick on a couple of points you brought up. When you talked about the government agent who was willing to say their name or what have you, I mean, one thing that I think I've come to realize is that a lot of people aren't afraid in the government from because there is a lot of bureaucracy around it, but also because nobody's going to believe anyway, right? Because of what we talked about is like some of this stuff is so out there that they know that like okay, even if I were to just spill the beans, it would just sound like I'm a crazy person mumbo jumbo, right? So from that perspective, and they're so good at disinformation and throwing misinformation out there where we're already in my opinion in a post-truth world where people can't even understand what's real and what's not anymore. And that might be what kind of allows some of these people to come out and speak so freely, because I've kind of wondered too, like why are they able to speak so freely? Are they sowing disinformation? And I don't think it really is a lot of time. I think it's just a time where like even the government itself at this point doesn't even know how do we get this information out. We've been lying for so long that nobody believes anything anyway, right? And we talked about even if aliens were to come down onto the front lawn and say hi to Joe Biden or whatever, like I think Joe Rogan even talks about this. Is like the moment the government tells me aliens are real, that's the moment I stop believing they're real, right? It's like,
Absolutely.
damn, that's a tough situation. And then there might be other aspects too. Before all the MH370 stuff and all the stuff I've learned about technology before then, I was one of those people that thought that the reason why they would hide it is because religion would be threatened and that people that are religious wouldn't be able to reconcile it. Now I have the exact opposite opinion, funny enough, that I think the religion will adapt to it quicker than anybody else because the reality will mean that there is a construct that we live in. And that if we then live in a construct, it's this idea that there must be a creator for it, which is very congruent with the idea of God and a divine entity. But I think that the same issue the government has applies regardless of if it's the religious people or non-religious people that have a problem with it is that I think they're afraid that people will just kill themselves for lack of a better word because of what we're talking about this idea of reincarnation that people will just think oh well, I'm just going to take the easy way out. This is an avatar situation where our soul lives on and personally that's what I think the situation is just for everybody who's watching what have you is that I think they're afraid that a lot of people that don't have great circumstances will check out. And this again goes back to this idea of the elites versus the non-elites. The elites don't want everybody to check out because they're taking advantage of it all, right? They want the poors, the serf class. They want them to stay, the serf class stay working wage slaves and what have you. And just real quick, the last thing I want to say is that this is just a personal story that I've had is that I've been pretty much unable to talk to my parents about pretty much anything related to the case because they are what I would call CNN brains. That they have, my dad's been somebody that's read the New York Times probably every single day for the last 50 years,
Mhm.
right? And he hasn't, in my opinion, come to realize that it's not like it was even 20, 30 years ago where like you would go to the newspaper to get the truth, right? It's come to a point now where it's pretty much just propaganda that's being spread under control. Maybe it always was. But one thing that we have been able to connect on is he's always been a Buddhist, pretty much his whole life, and they believe in reincarnation. And recently we sat down and I was like, "Hey, Dad, I want to talk to you about what do you think happens when you die?" And he told me, "Well, I'm a Buddhist, blah blah blah. I would believe in reincarnation." I said, "So do I." And I kind of told him, and I could just tell from the look in his face that he was kind of surprised by what I was telling him. And it was funny because I told him like I think we've arrived at the same end conclusion, but from different perspectives. Like he came at it from this conclusion of like he just always felt connected to it, especially when he was even younger in his 20s, and he would travel the world and stuff like that. And for me, it's like I came at it from looking in the science of it. Like I look at the science and I go, the logical conclusion is that our body is a capsule that's holding our soul and
Absolutely.
perhaps why that's what this is all about. Go ahead.
Absolutely. No, I agree. No, I agree with everything. Literally everything you're saying. I mean, we said this on the podcast the other day. We said, our parents, when you try to talk to them about what's going on today, they just cannot
Yeah.
fathom it. There's no way. They cannot grasp what is going on. I mean, my mom, if I call her at 5:45, she's like, "Hey, I got 15 minutes before World News Tonight or whatever it is
Yeah.
comes on." And that is her worldview. Whatever that World News Tonight comes on and says, that is what she believes. Nothing outside of that, by the way, nothing. And then,
Yeah.
by the way, I saw someone that said I was trying to cross reference like what he was saying. Who was this guy that was on our podcast
Yeah.
we're talking about? I will say that the episode where we had the guy on that is the government employee is the Israel war with Palestine and Hamas, World War III breakdown with Rashid, Rasheed. So you guys can go check out what he says there. But I actually want to bring on Rashid to a
Mhm.
deeper episode because me and Rashid talked before this episode. Actually, me and Rashid talked for probably an hour and a half. Um, Now Rashid is in his position. Um, he's in a high up position, but he was in my opinion, I guess in weird other positions before the position he has now. So he was in positions in the military, like high up military, almost psyop type stuff, before he got in the position he is in now. And so when we started talking about the virus, right? We won't go into that. But when we started talking about that and we were talking on a personal level, he was talking about the psyop aspect, right? Of he was like, man, that whole realm, that whole 3 years it was like everything I had ever learned or knew. It was like I ripped out a page from our book that we were trained on.
Mm.
And and so when he got kind of deep into that, I was like, wow. And although we were not talking about that with our podcast that we brought him on for, I do want to bring him on in that capacity. I don't know that he can do that right in this position necessarily, um but it is very interesting. I think we're living in a world today that um people are looking desperately for answers, right? I mean, people are desperate for answers to try to figure out what in the hell is going on. I think we're all I think if anything, as much as we are divided, we are united in realizing that something is not right. Like there is a lot of things that are not right about the world right now. And I think if I had a microphone to the entire world, if I had one microphone to the entire world. And by the way, our podcast over 5 years, we are so blessed to be able to reach as many people as we do, and I'm so thankful for that. I literally wake up every single day. I wake up to that is my purpose, and I've never known my purpose. I used
Mhm.
to um I used to feel like my purpose, which I still do marketing, I still do stuff like that, but I was always chasing money, right? I was
Mhm.
chasing money, a way to survive. But I'm telling you guys that are listening right now, when you find your purpose, then nothing else matters. And when you find your purpose, money will come. If it's meant to come, it'll come. But it'll support you. Your purpose will support you if you're passionate. I guess if you're passionate enough about it, um, your support will come. And our podcast is our passion. It is our purpose. And and I'm just saying that I think now people like you, Ashton, people like podcasts like Joe Rogan or whoever, people that are really speaking the truth, no matter who it is. Um, I think those people are the most instrumental people in society and in our future today. Because
Mhm.
when they take that away, because that is my biggest fear, by the way. For those that want to listen, like, what is my biggest fear in my life every single day? Take my microphone away. Like, take my ability to speak the truth, or at least speak my opinion to people to verify it for themselves. That is my biggest fear. And
Mhm.
and I think they're desperately trying to do that right now. And if you guys can imagine a world right now to where as bad as it is right now, take away everything that is against their narrative. take away Ashton, take away me, take away Joe Rogan, take away all these people, and all you hear is the government's message. Think about how your world would be. Think about how depressed you might be right now, even given all of the propaganda that is being spit in our face on a daily basis. But then take away every dissenting voice from that as well. Think about how depressed you would be. Because you're in North Korea. I mean, we're close to that, by the way. I feel like we're close to North Korea. I mean, I don't know how far out we are from that, but I just feel like we're not as far as you think. And
Yeah.
that's a very scary thing. And so Ashton, with
Hmm.
your MH370 thing, look, people can say MH370 and the videos and the satellite videos or there's going to be people that say that's BS. And there's going to be people that say that, hey, I believe this. But at the very least, I know that Ashton 100% believes us. And by the way, based on people that we've talked to, and even the guy I literally just talked about, the government employee that said he was one of the guys that said, uh, check out Ashton, check out his videos. You need to cover this. Now, I don't know what that means, by the way, Ashton. I have no idea. I think I've kind of told you about this, but
Yeah.
I don't know what that means. I don't know if he knows something that we don't know. He would probably never say it. I don't know. Um, but take away all of that. What do you have left? What do you have left? If you have no dissenting voice in
Yep.
any topic, period, what do you have? You have dystopian, tyrannical North Korea, or even worse.
Reddit. No,
Yeah,
that's
You have Reddit
you
mods.
get
You have
Reddit.
Reddit mods.
Yeah, and there's another topic that I'm afraid to talk about on the podcast, but what I'll say is that I took a chance and I made a comment on the news subreddit on a particular thing related to the date of yesterday, about somebody who died on that day. And not only did I just get downvoted, and it was just basically saying that we should not glorify death or people that are killed. Not only, and there was a lot of comments that were glorifying death, which should be against social media rules, but none of them were being, moderated against. Not only did I get moderated, I got permanently banned from one single message on this particular subreddit about news. And I think it goes to the point that you just mentioned, which is that when you remove all dissenting opinion, what's left is you get not just an echo chamber, but a literal brainwashing machine. And it leads these people that live their lives from those particular social media platforms to not realize like what normal people think and what they believe and what have you. And if you think about some of the podcasts that I've been on that were very hostile, that's that's what I call the Reddit brain, where they don't even know what real people believe. They think that they're going to look like heroes for trying to chop me down or whatever, right? And then they find out that real people are like looking at them going, what, why are you such a douche? Like, what, how could you possibly be so close minded and stuff like that, right? And you're right. Like what the government is doing is they're taking away people's microphones. They're taking away people's views, and that is what reinforces that echo chamber. And this is why even when you go to Reddit and you go to like the Joe Rogan subreddit, it's like 100% against him. I was talking to Jimmy Corsetti about this. Jimmy Corsetti got banned from that subreddit. He was like one of the only guests who's actually been banned from the Joe Rogan subreddit for like just trying to comment about it because everybody's just trying to rail on him. And it's like, man, just think about the emotional and mental damage that's doing to like a whole generation of people that are out there. And that's why I think that it's so important that we do have free speech, is that we do have the capability to speak publicly and openly. And if people don't want that, then I think we have to get rid of anonymity on the internet, and I think that we have to do away with stuff like Section 230 protections, because if either everybody gets to speak freely or nobody does, is kind of my opinion. And I'm fine with either way we want to go with it, right? Because if we then get rid of social media and say, okay, we're not going to have it, then people have to force to have interactions in person, right? And they have to try a different route of doing it. I'd prefer if everybody can just speak freely. But yeah, so I 100% agree. I think that That's what's been going on, especially in the last few years. This is what I personally don't think my political opinions have changed at all. I think that I'm still the same person politically that I always was. I've always believed that your rights end where mine begin, and that I think that's something that if everybody were to live by those rules, it establishes pretty clear guidelines for what is against the law and what isn't against the law in the United States of America. I think that we have this Overton window where the politics has just shifted, and it's shifted because of what you just mentioned, is that only certain views are tolerated, and there isn't anymore this idea of equal justice. The last story that I'll bring up here is related to somebody that I have come to find to be, I mean, not like necessarily a, like my best friend, but somebody that I've come to respect, which is Jake Chansley. He's been vilified in the media. He went to prison over,
Insurrectionists.
yeah, he
Sorry.
went to prison.
That's-
And, I told somebody at a dinner the other night, I'm not going to say who it was or anything like that, oh, I know that guy. Like, I've been hanging out with him. It turns out he's not at all what the media tried to make him out to be. He's like the nicest guy I've ever met. I could never imagine this guy ever hurting anybody ever. He's way
Yeah.
nicer than I am, even. And they were like, I wish he would stay in prison. And I'm like, man, this is like even people that are really smart, really intelligent people, well read people, people that have highly educated. Everybody's susceptible to the propaganda and the brainwashing and that kind of idea of if you remove people's microphones, then people start to cohere towards these peer reviewed, approved beliefs. And I just kind of said I didn't want to harp on it too much, but I said, I think if you were to listen and talk to the guy, you might be surprised at what he really believes. He's running as an independent. He's not raising money. He wants term limits on people in Congress. It's like, I think you'd find you might have a lot in common with him at the end of the day. Now, yes, does he consider himself a shaman and have a lot of spiritualistic beliefs? Sure, but that's not anything that makes somebody a bad person, So,
Yeah.
just some
No,
thoughts.
I mean, I feel like that Chansley is I feel like they made him out to be a subjective insurrectionist, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this is what they wanted to do. They wanted to use this image and what he stood for, even though he didn't stand for that, but that's what they wanted to use him for. And listen, I mean, the reality of this is like J6, we won't go too deep into this, but there were a lot of people in 2020 that felt like that there was a lot of weird stuff that happened, right? At the very least. And what happened with J6 and all that stuff, I do feel like I just watched, by the way, did you watch the Alex Jones oh my God, live feed debate last night? Did you watch any of that with the
I saw a
Kratz
clip with,
brothers?
was not the one with Destiny? Was that a different one?
Yeah, and that one. Yeah, no, it's the same one. Yeah.
I didn't watch it all, but he's another person that we're really broaching the line of what's going to get me canceled here today. But no, he's another person too. Where when I went on his show, I had a lot of people, even in my own Discord, saying don't talk to this guy, right?
Mm.
Because of the stuff around the lawsuit that he had happened, right, and the Sandy Hook stuff, and even myself, like coming from where I used to be, I'm like, oh, do I really want to go there with this? But this isn't the kind of case where you can really be pick and choose who you go talk to, right? It
No,
turned
you
out
can't.
we had one of the best interviews of any of them with him, right? He
Yeah.
even said that this was one of the most mind blowing interviews he had ever had. And I'm going,
Well, this is the
wow.
same guy?
Yeah,
Oh
let's
my
go.
God, I'm literally just thinking about this. This was the same dude.
Yeah.
So he was the guy on Alex Jones last night, live, the debate. Was this the same dude?
Oh, no. So you mean Destiny or who are we talking about?
Okay.
Because Alex Jones debated Destiny, I think, yesterday.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And it was
Here's-
about a lot of the topics that we were just talking about.
Okay. Yeah.
And stuff like that. And I think that's where that whole thread that I was reading or whatever came from related to that. But
But isn't it interesting that like okay, so but you agreed with this guy on your topic, right?
I mean, Alex
Destiny?
Jones.
No, Destiny.
No, I have Destiny. I've never talked to. So, a little
Oh, okay.
side story though. Destiny and I used to play StarCraft against each other like 20 years ago, and
Okay.
that's how he ended up getting big. Was he was one of the first like video game streamers. And now obviously he's morphed into a whole like personality and what have you related to it. But he was
Yeah.
known as like people hated him because he was super toxic. But now I'll tell you the truth is I was pretty toxic back then too. So we would have like, little arguments in the chat. I don't know if he would even remember a lot of this, but maybe if I told him my handle name, he might remember. And I, I'd never got into all that streaming stuff like that. So that's kind of
Yeah.
the different perspectives. And I don't think I would agree with him on very much, honestly, anymore, which is
Yeah.
interesting because I used to think that I was left of where he was at from a political perspective. And now, if I were to talk, everybody would say I'm to the right of where he's at.
Yeah.
So it's just
Even though,
interesting how that stuff changes.
even though you're probably middle.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
definitely middle. I think middle of the road in general, but I don't know. A
Yeah.
lot of people think that they are. So that's beside the
Yeah.
point, though.
No, I agree that. But yeah, I guess I'm not gonna stay on here too long. We
Yeah,
had a podcast tonight. I just want to point out that I'm very proud of you, Ashton. I and we've said this on the podcast before. We brought you on. I think you've done an amazing job. I think that we have to have people like you come out and talk about this stuff because and not just talk about this stuff. I mean, we can do podcasts. And by the way, when you do a podcast where you're constantly talking about different subjects, it's hard. It's hard because, you have to try your very best to understand and acknowledge everything surrounding what you're talking about the
hmm
very best you possibly can. And that's given a like 2 day scale of time. Right.
yeah,
And so you should of all people should know that, hey, how long have you been doing MH370? I mean, it's been a while. It's been 6 months.
5 months. It's not even that long, surprisingly.
A- And how much have you dove into like the physics, the science, the
Yeah,
engineering, all of the stuff of that?
yeah,
That is a lot of stuff to dive into. And so at the very least, when I see naysayers of people that literally have zero clue
hmm
in any aspect of what they're even talking about, they 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 say, "Oh, this is this or this is that and this is this." Dude, you haven't done any research whatsoever. I mean,
yeah,
maybe you looked up some stuff on Google, right? But the amount that you have thrown yourself into the physics and everything, not even just the physics, but just the ability of the United States government, the spy satellites, the drones,
hmm
the aircraft, how the I mean, what the I guess you can say a HUD would look like as far as a drone, how this whole thing works. Nobody does that. I mean, and the people
yeah,
that do that can understand on a deeper level more so than other people. And so you're obviously going to get people that say, "Well, this is crazy. It's ridiculous."
yeah,
And I watched your Tim Pool interview, which by the way, I'm not going to say anything bad about Tim Pool. I actually think he was very respectful.
yeah.
He I think he did a good job by being respectful, but he also had his own opinions and
Mhm.
based on, the things that he had I don't know, talked about before, whatever the case is. But at the very least, I think you handled yourself well. When I was listening to his standpoint on the videos, I feel like, from my perspective, I feel like he was. I feel like, and by the way, I'm saying this respectfully.
Yeah,
Um, I feel like he was uneducated to the terms and the level of what we are talking about with these videos with MH370 because if anyone has followed you in your research and all this stuff with the MH370 videos, you'd understand there is a lot more involved than just, oh, I can do that in Unreal
yeah,
Engine in 10 minutes
yeah,
because it's not the way that works.
yeah.
And
Just
it's
real.
just
Go ahead. Finish your thought. Sorry, sir.
no, 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 sorry. I mean, it's just not the way it works because I've done in Unreal Engine 5.
hmm
I know that pretty well. Um, but it's not going to look like that. It's not the same.
hmm
It's not the same thing. It's not how that works. And so I heard his point of view. I got it. He wasn't saying it, by the way, in like an asshole
Yeah,
way. But he was just saying like, hey, here's what I think. And by the way, I felt like you did a good job saying, well, but look, here's the reasons why this is not necessarily as easy
yeah,
or as easy as you think. Um, I just think that 2024, for everybody listening, it's going to be a shit show. I want everybody to be prepared because this year is going to be crazy. We have election year. We have, in my opinion, I think we have a turning point in America. I think we have a point to where we're about to see whether we are a um, whether we have a democracy or whether we don't. I know the Democrats are using that word a lot right now, but
Hmm.
we're to find out whether we do actually have a democracy or not.
Yeah,
There is some speculation, by the way. I can break this a little bit on your stuff,
sure.
just based on a couple of things I've heard, but I think Joe Biden is about to be subsequently pulling out of the 2024 election within the next few
Yeah.
days. I have heard that from some sources. And so what does that mean? Well, we don't know, but
Oh, I know. I was telling my brother 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I said I hope he's ready to vote for Gavin Newsom because that's what
yeah,
it's
it's
going
going to
to
be.
be. There's no, it
But
wasn't a
let's
surprise that Gavin Newsom was going on a world tour, guys. And I'm going to break that here right now, just in case everybody we end up telling the truth, the future here. You can, take this and you can post this and say Chad and Ashton on a random stream called it.
Mhm.
Wouldn't surprise me at all. I said 2 years ago to my brother over Christmas that get ready for it. That's what's going to end up happening because.
But if you're worried about if you're worried okay, so if you're one of those people that are worried about like, hey, say that you're like not Democrat, you're a Republican or Libertarian or whatever. Say that you're one of those people. Who is your biggest threat to run? It's going to be Michelle Obama. I'm just going to go
Hmm.
and tell you that. That is the Trojan horse for the Democratic
Hmm.
Party. And Gavin Newsom can come run. I don't think he will win against Trump, probably, regardless of whether you love or hate Trump. I don't think Gavin Newsom will win. I mean,
No.
you look at California, you look at what California. I mean, just look at California.
I'm somebody that
Like,
voted for Gavin Newsom when I was living in California, and then I voted to recall him. So, yeah, I think
yeah,
that he's got a lot of baggage that comes with him. I think, and that was the
I,
reason when I was actually campaigning to. I was out there collecting signatures for several months. I was, I guess you could say, in between jobs at the time, and I was out there collecting signatures with real people. And I said the reason why we're doing this is because Gavin Newsom's going to try to run for president, and I want there to be a blemish when he tries because of all the stuff that he was doing to the state at the time. Anyway,
by the way,
continue.
someone said in your chat, Kennedy. What do you think about Kennedy, by the way?
Yeah, I like RFK a lot, honestly.
I do too. I do too.
I would vote for him for sure. I think that the reality is the Democrats are never going to let him be the guy,
Yep.
just like they didn't let Bernie be the guy, back however many, oh boy, almost 8 years ago now. Because it's a selection process, right? And because he's outspoken and says what he wants to say, and because of his stance on COVID and the shots, etc., like I think there's no chance they'll let him be the guy. And then just from a perspective of it's kind of a petty perspective, but I think that his voice stuff gets in the way as well. Sadly, I know it's
Yeah,
disgusting to say
yeah,
that, but
it's true.
when you're looking at like presidential stuff, a lot of it's a popularity contest, man. It's not, and so every little thing matters. And these are some of the things why people like Trump because he just speaks off the cuff and he's a guy that people can connect to, etc.
Yeah.
With RFK, he's like he kind of stutters a little bit, and this is as much as it sucks to say it, it ends up being a strike against him. But everything he says is, in my opinion, on the money.
Yeah, and even Vivek. I mean, I think,
Yeah.
look, I really like Vivek.
Hmm.
But I don't think they're gonna let him be the nominee either. I mean, you could probably see a Trump Vivek ticket,
Hmm.
but
I see a
I don't know.
Trump Carlson ticket personally. But real quick, what I want to say is a point before I forget. You were talking about because this is a really important one about the case. Is that a lot of people that I go on and I talk to on their podcast, they don't do their homework at all, right? And that's why they get to what you just mentioned, where they say, "Oh, I could have create that in an hour in the Unreal Engine," which of course Tim
Yeah,
Pool cannot do that, right? Not even close.
yeah, I
And you
don't
look
believe
at the
that.
requirements and evidence. This is why I ended up on that podcast talking through the requirements, which I don't always talk through on every podcast. It just kind of depends on if people start to push back on that. I go, okay, are you sure? Because here's the list of stuff you'd have to know, right?
Mhm.
Just to kind of push back on that. But like you go through and you look at all the case and the evidence, and this is why, like on the podcast, I mentioned like, well, why, if these things are fake, how come they tell the story of what happened to the plane better than any other story today by wide margin? Use more evidence than anything else, and all you have to do, the only thing you have to do is throw out these Immersat pings, and if you throw out those Immersat pings, this is by far definitely what happened to the plane, right? And that's the difference
Yeah,
between a cover up and this narrative that's out there. But going back to the politics stuff, which I'm happy to talk about for a few minutes as well, is like my opinion of Vivek is there's something off about him. Right from the beginning, I felt like he's a little too produced, too polished.
Okay.
He's also kind of young. I mean, I love everything he's saying, right?
Yeah, I
And
get.
this is just me from a
Hmm.
perception perspective, right? It feels like he's also kind of been selected, is the reality. That's what it
Yeah.
feels like to me. Versus you look at somebody like Trump, and I'll be honest with everybody else, I'm not like a huge Trump supporter in any way,
Yeah.
shape, or
Same way.
form.
Same way.
But he comes off as completely honest. He says what he thinks, right?
Don't
When I
give a
look at
damn.
Vivek, it's like I feel like everything he's saying is he's looking at a sheet that says, here's all the things I'm supposed to say, right? And somebody even caught him on the conspiracy Reddit I was looking at yesterday or 2 days ago, and they even caught him. Where back in right after the January 6th event, he was saying how this is horrible, blah blah blah, and then yesterday he was saying something about in completely opposite vein, right? Like how it was a detriment. It's like he's like kind of flowing with the wind, or flip flopping and blowing with the wind in that case. So that's my concern with him, is that I want to know if he's really genuine about everything he says. It
Yeah.
just feels like he's just saying the right things, and okay, maybe that's fine. So that's just my opinion.
Well, unpopular opinion,
Sure.
by the way, someone said in your chat, they said, let's see what they say. They said, well, there's one person that said MAGA 2024. But someone said Vivek, if elected, watch him change his tune ASAP.
That's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah. And by the way, I think that's also Nikki Haley.
Oh yeah.
Like Nikki Haley, by the way, I don't know if anyone knows this, but
Isn't she
Nikki
WEF?
Haley, she was our governor, where my wife Sherry and I live, where we host our podcast. She was our governor. Nikki Haley was our South Carolina governor. Didn't love her as governor, but I mean, I thought she was all right. But Trump came out and said, "Hey, by the way, just wait and see how fast she turns against you, like she did me." And that was a great comment because, Nikki Haley was, one of his girls in his administration. And as soon as everyone went against Trump, she turned against him. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Here's unpopular opinion though, and I'll just say this, and I'm not going
Sure.
to say it's a you banned or anything else, but I will say is that I don't think it matters who we're going to vote for in 2024.
Yeah.
I really don't think so. I think we are past that.
I don't think it
I
ever matters, in my opinion, man. And here's
No,
the
but
thing.
I,
Oh,
I
go
think
ahead,
I think
please.
it's beyond. I think it's beyond even what you're saying. I think it's beyond like I think there is a massive system set up right now to where it does not matter at all whatsoever.
Yeah.
I think that they have a potential system that is in place that you know, we don't have a there is no look, I say this on the podcast and this is just my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Just not facts. But I say that there will never be a pro-American Republican president in office ever again.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. It
I don't
doesn't.
know. You can take it from what it's worth.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. And since we're just throwing it out there, like I probably would vote for Trump in a heartbeat if he had fired Anthony Fauci. If he
Oh
had done
God.
that,
Yeah.
I think now looking back, I think that, in my opinion, as somebody just looking on the outside in, that was probably his biggest blunder, was not doing that. I think that he disenfranchised himself with a lot of people that are probably now on like the RFK bandwagon. Just to be
Yep.
honest.
I agree.
Um, and yeah, if he had done that, I think I'd be all in. And but reality is, my personal opinion is, I think Trump's going to win no matter what. I think that he beats anybody out there, just because one
In the
thing I
reverse.
learned from the Obama era, real quick, and I voted for Obama. I'll say just out there,
I did too,
um,
actually.
is that it's a lot about like what your momentum is, right? Like you've got this momentum if you can really like pull people, and when you see Trump's rallies, like it's like wow,
Yeah.
he pulls people, and
Hmm.
that's something that I've always felt is a powerful aspect of politics, even in companies as well. Like I even think that existed with like Tesla, where the reason why I would tell people invest in Tesla and early mid 2010 was like people just want it to be successful, right? And when you want something to be successful, it ends up kind of like you said, like when you were talking about, if you say your truth and you follow it, you will be successful. It's that same kind of idea that's out there. And if you come out there and you lie and you're deceptive or whatever, people don't resonate with it. And I think that applies
Yeah.
to all aspects of life.
Yeah. It's weird. I think that most people, and it goes back to this. Like, I think most people want aliens to come invade because
Yeah.
of literally because of our choices we have. Like most people are just saying, look how screwed up our government is. Like if aliens come invade, like what is the worst case scenario? Like,
I'm
like
rooting for alien invasion, honestly, at this point. Although I think it
exactly.
would be a big psyop, but yeah, I'm still
Yes.
rooting for it. Man, I wish those shadow aliens were real and they were invading. I'd be sitting there going, "Yes, shadow aliens, take over. Let's end this."
But do you realize the psychological aspect of that, like the aliens thing? Do you realize that the psychological aspect, I really
Oh yeah,
believe it's because of how screwed our actual people are. Like people are looking for a savior of some kind. Like
yeah.
they're literally looking for like the Miami thing, which by the way, we still don't know what the deal is 100% with the Miami thing. We don't. I mean, we had some Miami officers that listen to our podcast, and by the way, this guy, I can read the message to you if you want me to, but he sent us a message and said, "Hey, we have some guys that want to talk to you about the Miami thing."
Yeah.
Um and I have not got back. I've not heard back from that. But regardless, people are desperate. Like they like. Isn't it sad when people are more desperate for aliens to come invade than they are our administration and our government?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, and I mean, yeah, I've looked into this stuff now, and I'm pretty off the Miami bandwagon stuff. I was coming back onto it for a minute, but I'm like 99.9% sure now that people are just making up these stories
Yeah, I
now, and
agree.
because of
Yeah.
because they saw, oh, Ashton got 10 million views, and Keemstar got 10 million views. Now they just kind of want to ride the coattails of it, but um, yeah, I definitely think that there's this idea that people just want change, right? And this even goes again back to Obama back in 2008. Is like that's what he was running on, hope and change. And
Yeah.
this is why also I think that generally you find there's a flip back and forth between the parties on different election years. We go to Democrat, Republican, because everybody just wants change. And then I'm old enough to realize we never get change, right? And this is why I'm just kind of disenfranchised with the system in general. Is that we always get a new person in there. They never have any significant change to the politics, to the government structure, or anything else related to it. And that's why I've kind of just come to this own personal opinion that like it's really more of a selection process, and nothing's really going to ever get done there. So, personally, yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Ashton, what do
Yeah,
you feel like is the hope for the people? What do you feel like is
yeah,
the hope for the people?
yeah. I mean, the hope for the people in general to me is the technology. So this is I was going to do a space and a stream about what does disclosure mean to people, and I wanted just people to come in and tell me what they think disclosure means. Because I think that everybody looks at it differently. You got the people that want to clap those alien cheeks. You've got the people that want to go fly to another solar system, right? And they just want to get the hell out of here, kind of to your point before. To me, I look at disclosure, and to me, it's the technology. It's the ability to change the circumstances of billions of people on this planet. To me, the things that I've been passionate about are helping people. And by helping people, I mean not having children go to bed hungry, not having there be homeless people with nothing on the streets. Because I
Yeah.
personally believe that living on the streets has a mental impact on people, a negative one.
Uh,
And with this technology, even with just room temperature superconductivity, we can just completely change the circumstances of the whole face of the planet, pretty much. And then that's
yeah.
just the beginning, right? I mean, talking about flying cars and being able to have computers, they're 1,000 times more powerful than we have right now. Being able to teleport different places,
Uh,
and it becomes like Star Trek. It really just becomes like Star Trek at that point.
by the way, Ashton,
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
think that you're going to be one of those guys in our time. And for those listeners that are listening right now, I'm telling you, Ashton's going to be one of these dudes. Whether you realize it now or not, he is going to be one of these guys. I don't even want to say why or why I think that, but I'm just telling you, he's going to be one of these guys. And you got to have these people. Ashton is an everyday, whatever the hell he does. I don't even know exactly.
Green
Whatever
thing, yeah.
Ashton does, it doesn't matter. Ashton is going to be one of these guys. I know Ashton on a pretty good personal level. We text and talk quite a bit,
Mhm.
and I'm just saying that Ashton's potentially going to be one of these people that change the course of our future and humanity. We have to have people like this, and that's why if we don't have people like this that tries to pave a new path or tries to go against a narrative, if we don't ever go against the narrative and pave a new path, we're never going to know anything different, anything new. We're just going to settle for what it is that the government and the elites say that we are allowed to know or believe. Um, and and it's going to be a hard battle, by the way. It's going to be it is going to be a very hard battle for those people that go against the grain. But I
Hmm.
believe in you, Ashton. I really do believe in you, by the way.
I
And
appreciate that.
and I believe you're smart enough to make those changes, to make those advancements in our future. I think we have people, and literally, I would even maybe compare you to like an Elon Musk, even though Elon Musk obviously he's got rockets and Tesla and all
Yeah.
this shit. But I think you can be that, right? And I think, but you can be that in a different way. And so when people, even when people look at Stephen Greer,
Hmm.
he's a grifter, he's this. You have to not just necessarily discredit him as a grifter. You have to look and listen to what he has to say. You have to take that into your consciousness, and then you have to apply that to everything else that you know and listen to and hear. Um, there are some people that may not be completely right. I mean, no
Yeah.
one's perfect, right? But there are people that you can take all of these different aspects and you can apply that to all of these different theories and things. And I think that we can really advance because in my opinion, I think Ashton will agree with me on this. We cannot no longer depend on the government in the United States or any world entity to advance us in civilization. We are at a cusp of advancing ourselves as independents, as people that get together. We start understanding and learning from each other, and that's how we really advance each other. And our biggest battle is the government trying to stop that from happening. And Ashton, I think you know what I'm talking about when I'm saying that.
Yep.
Um, but I'm just saying that I think that that is what we have to do. And so to save humanity, how do we save humanity? We have to save humanity with ourselves.
Yeah.
We have to connect with each other, and we have to figure out ways. Like if government wants to lock off scientists from figuring out reverse engineering or this or that, they want to compartmentalize everything. Well, we have to open up all of that in our independent media, in our independent conversations, in our independent science. That's how we change the world, and I think the Ashton's MH370 thing. I think that is a huge first step. And I also think that's maybe why there's so much backlash. So I wanted to point that
Yeah.
out. I think that one day people are going to look back on this and everything you're trying to learn and understand, even in our personal conversations, by the way.
Hmm.
Um, I think that's going to be huge. I think 10 years from now, 15 years from now, people don't necessarily understand it right now. And I think that maybe you will release some information that you have been learning in the background outside of the public realm.
Hmm.
Um, but I think that people are going to understand that like it is us that determines our future. It is not the government. It is not the powers that be. It is us who determines where we go from here. Because if we depend and only let the government tell us where we go nowhere.
Yep.
And I think if you look back, by the way, at history, it was the people that went against the grain that actually made the biggest changes and the biggest staples in our history and in our future now.
Yeah. And I think,
Ashton, I'm very proud of you.
thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Chad. I love you guys so much. And I think that you just said some really nice words. One thing I would say I get reminded of a lot. A lot of people have said stuff about me that I think is inaccurate, but one of the things that I guess I find a little bit offensive is this idea that like I'm full of myself. I would say that that's definitely not the case. I think that a lot of times when people say stuff that people don't want to hear, they have this idea that oh that person must be narcissist or whatever. But I
Hmm.
think that Kim.com told me one thing before he started kind of retweeting all my stuff and boosting the message a lot was, stay humble when you make it or whatever. And I told him I'm never going to change. There's nothing that's going to change me.
Yeah, you can.
I'm old enough at this point where like who I am is pretty solidified. And even if
Hmm.
I were Even if I were to become president of the United States, even if I were to become an Elon Musk with billions of dollars, it wouldn't change who I am at all. I would still be trying to seek the same exact things as I am as this person you see in front of you here today. And this is why I started MH370X, is that it's about connecting people, just what you talked about. And we've been talking about politics and stuff that I think is somewhat divisive, of course.
Device.
But the reality is, the people that have been following this case are of multiple political persuasions. We have people that come from working class backgrounds, people that come from white collar backgrounds, people that are very educated, people that don't have lots of education, but we all have the same common purpose and same common goal, right? Is that we are looking at the science to figure out and drive our future forward. And how are we doing it? We're not doing it through mainstream media channels. I've never been on TV, never once, right?
Yeah.
I'm just going on alternative media, talking to real people. And like you said, it's, when they take away your microphone, well, we create our own avenue for it. And I'll
Yeah.
just throw a quick thank you to Elon Musk again, even though my personal belief is that he's been getting attacked because he took away one of the government's propaganda tools, which was Twitter. And once he
Mhm.
took that away, he gave power back to the people. And he gave power back to people like us. And, I've been using that because I think that this is one of the last avenues that we really have free speech where we can hear real people. We don't always have to agree with everything everybody's saying. And we're going to see stuff that we don't like to hear that's out there. But that's what free speech is all about. It's not just
Yeah.
all people you agree with all the time, right?
Absolutely.
So,
I agree. I agree, Ashton. But listen, I think 2024 is going to be a good year for you.
I appreciate
I
that.
believe that. And by the way, there was someone in the chat that says she's a cougar, Ashton. So I'm just saying.
I appreciate that. Keemstar was joking around that I made a joke about one of the girls that was, or ladies, let's say women, that was mentioning the mentioning the aliens in Miami thing. He's like, "Oh, we got to get you set up in a space because Ashton's thirsty out there." And I just started laughing. I love Keemstar. He just cracks me up, man.
Oh, he's funny. By the way, Keemstar has been around for a very long time.
Yeah.
He used to commentate all of the YouTube stuff. So Logan Paul, Jake
Mm-hmm.
Paul, everything, all the drama in YouTube. He was huge in there. And it's kind of funny because we start seeing him now in the UFO space.
Mm-hmm.
He's trying to transition into a YouTube news guy. Now
Yeah.
he transitioned to a UFO guy. Um, which is kind of interesting. Either way, uh,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's all I have to say, Ashton. I
Yeah. Any
appreciate you,
any final
son.
thoughts on this? We had a little impromptu hard truths here today, Chad. I think it was a good one. I may have to edit this and post it up as an official hard truths.
Well, the final thoughts I have for everybody is that look, here's the deal. We're in 2024, guys, and at the end of the day, we have to realize our surroundings. We have to look at every single thing we see. And I think that we have a opportunity right now. I think we have an opportunity to really harness the information we are giving because I think that, in my opinion, um, probably within 6 to 8 months, and I hope I'm wrong, by the way, by
Mhm.
this, but I'm saying within 6 to 8 months, we may not no longer have the opportunity to harness the information we are given right now. Like, do you ever think like when you are healthy, for example, and you take for granted your healthiness, you take it for granted your ability to walk to your car, to go to the grocery store, to go for a walk, to go for a run, to go do all these things, right? You take for granted that. But say that you get cancer, or say that you get some disease, or say that you break your leg, or you even lose your leg. And then all of a sudden you're in bed. You cannot move. You cannot function normally as a human being anymore.
Mhm.
And yet just the day before all of this happened, you were able to function completely fine, but you took for granted that. You didn't do all these things that you could have done. You didn't go for a walk. You didn't harness these abilities that you have as a human being, as a normal functioning human being with no health problems. But one day it comes along that you no longer have those abilities to do that. What we're seeing right now,
Mhm.
guys. what we're seeing in the podcast with our podcast, with Ashton's platform, his ability to speak, his ability to get out his thoughts and his opinions and his evidence, along with our podcast, along with this exact stream right now. Um, these are things that are like our health. And I understand that you guys are listening to this right now and you're like, hey, man, we're harnessing this, even though you don't realize you are, but you are getting a taste of freedom. This is a taste of freedom. Hearing a
Hmm.
conversation, hearing discourse, hearing things, hearing people talk about things that are not necessarily um, granted in the realm of the agenda against, in my opinion, by the way, against a globalist or for the globalist or New World Order. Um, you have to understand that that can be taken away very fast. And by the way, I feel like it is going to be.
Yeah.
I feel like regardless of how we see this, I think that our ability to do what we're doing right now is no longer going to be able to be done within 6 to 8 months, maybe a year. Maybe I'll give it a year.
Yeah. And I
And I
think.
hope
Oh,
I'm wrong.
oh yeah.
I
Go
hope
ahead.
I'm
Land
wrong.
your point. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just saying I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And so I just want you guys to understand that like your fight is for information.
Hmm.
And you guys, and we say this all the time on our podcast, you got to fight, man. You got to tell everyone you know. Like our biggest threat to society and humanity is information. And if we lose that, we lose everything. We lose medical freedom. We lose freedom in general. We lose everything that we ever have known as human beings as being just be able, just to be able to discourse with other human beings. We've already lost a lot of that, by the way. Our last stance here is communication over the internet. But once they control the internet, then we lose control of our conversation. They've already basically stopped human communication because they have transversed that to now internet communication or digital communication. But the reason they have done that is because they want to be able to control that. And it's so much easier to control digital communication than it is in-person physical communication. But they have to stop the physical in-person communication. So now what they want to do is control digital communication. They want to control what your narrative and your discourse is. And so, guys, don't take for granted what you have and what you're listening to.
Hmm.
Fight for the people you listen to. Fight for people like Ashton. Fight for people that you believe in. Fight for people that you believe in the message, and tell everyone you possibly know about the people that you believe in their message, because that's the only way we're going to survive this. We have to have. I always say, like, how do you fight the powers that be? Well, you have to tell everyone else that, hey, this is what we gotta listen to. We gotta fight for the truth. We gotta fight for the message. And if you can do that, man, we have a chance. But otherwise, we don't.
Yeah, no, and I think that what you're saying there is like don't take your time for granted. That we have when we have this freedom, and don't take your freedoms for granted. Either like these, take it for granted, and then it'll be gone before you know it. And I think we've seen a lot of them disappear. So I agree with everything
Absolutely,
you're saying, Chad. And thank you for coming on and talking to me tonight.
absolutely, Ashton. Well, man, we always appreciate you coming on our podcast. Anyone who listens to us, I mean, Investigator Podcast, that's our podcast. You
Hmm.
guys can go check it out. And we have a lot of good episodes, Ashton, by the way. I think we're at what, 4 or 5 now? I think it's
Uh,
4 or 5.
yeah, I think five even because we had one impromptu as well. So we've been having some good conversations, and I look forward to more as well.
Absolutely. Well, guys, have a great night. Ashton, thank you for having me on, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Chad. Take it easy, buddy.
Peace out.